The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Lincoln High School as students filled the cafeteria for lunch period. The familiar sounds of teenage chatter, clattering trays, and scraping chairs created the usual symphony of midday chaos that echoed off the institutional walls. Among the hundreds of students navigating their social hierarchies and daily dramas, most barely noticed the quiet figure standing near the entrance. Marcus Thompson had been working as a security guard at Lincoln High for 3 years, and in that time, he had become as much a part of the school's landscape as the lockers lining the hallways. At 52 years old, Marcus carried himself with the steady presence of someone who had seen enough of life to remain calm in almost any situation. His uniform was always neat, his badge polished, and his expression generally pleasant, but professional. What most students didn't know about Marcus was the path that had led him to this job. 20 years earlier, he had been a decorated military police officer, serving tours in difficult locations where keeping the peace required both physical courage and exceptional judgment. After his military service, he had worked for a private security company, protecting corporate executives and managing security for large events. But a series of personal losses, his wife's death from cancer, his teenage son's struggles with addiction, and his own battle with depression had led him to seek something different. Working at a high school hadn't been part of any grand plan. Marcus had taken the job because he needed steady work with decent benefits, and because the hours allowed him to be home in the evenings to care for his elderly mother. But over time, he had discovered something unexpected in the hallways of Lincoln High, a sense of purpose that came from being a stabilizing presence in the lives of young people who were navigating some of the most challenging years of their lives. Marcus had developed a reputation among students and staff as someone who was firm but fair, who could de-escalate tense situations without drama or confrontation. He had broken up countless fights, helped lost freshmen find their classrooms, and even talked a few students through panic attacks or emotional crises. His approach was always the same: calm, measured, and focused on solving problems rather than creating bigger ones. The students at Lincoln High came from diverse backgrounds, creating a complex social ecosystem that could be both supportive and cruel, sometimes within the same group of friends. Marcus had observed these dynamics long enough to recognize the patterns: the kids who acted out because they were struggling at home, the ones who bullied others to mask their own insecurities, and the quiet ones who suffered in silence rather than draw attention to themselves. It was during this particular lunch period that Marcus first noticed the situation developing near the back corner of the cafeteria. A group of 5 students had gathered around one of the smaller tables, and their body language immediately caught his attention. There was something predatory about the way they had positioned themselves around a single student, who sat alone with his lunch tray. The student at the center of their attention was David Kim, a 15-year-old sophomore who had transferred to Lincoln High at the beginning of the school year. David was small for his age, with thick glasses and an overall appearance that seemed to make him a target for the kind of students who sought out those they perceived as different or vulnerable. He kept his head down most of the time, spoke quietly when called upon in class, generally tried to move through his days without attracting notice. The group surrounding David was led by Tyler Brooks, a 17-year-old junior who had been held back a year and seemed determined to establish his dominance through intimidation rather than academic achievement. Tyler was bigger than most students his age, the kind of athletic build that might have made him successful in sports if he had been able to maintain the grades required to participate. Instead, he had found his identity in being someone other students feared or avoided. Marcus began moving casually in their direction, using the practice technique he had learned during his military service, appearing to patrol randomly while actually positioning himself to observe and potentially intervene in a developing situation. He could see Tyler leaning over David's table, speaking in a voice that was low enough not to carry to other tables but aggressive enough that David was clearly uncomfortable. The other students in Tyler's group were playing their expected roles, some laughing at whatever Tyler was saying, others simply standing there to provide an intimidating presence. Marcus recognized this dynamic from countless similar situations he had witnessed over his years at the school. It was pack behavior, where individual students who might never engage in bullying on their own became participants when they were part of a group led by someone like Tyler. David sat frozen at his table, his sandwich untouched in front of him, clearly hoping that if he didn't react or engage, the group would lose interest and move on to something else. It was a survival strategy that Marcus had seen many times, the attempt to become invisible in the face of aggression. Unfortunately, Marcus also knew that this approach rarely worked with persistent bullies, who often interpreted passivity as invitation to escalate their behavior. As Marcus continued to move closer, he could see that the situation was building towards something more significant than just verbal harassment. Tyler's body language was becoming more aggressive, and the other students in his group were feeding off that energy. David, meanwhile, was beginning to show signs of real distress. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept glancing around. As if looking for an escape route, Marcus had intervened in hundreds of these situations during his time at Lincoln High. And his usual approach was straightforward. Move in quickly, disperse the group with his presence and authority, and then follow up individually with both the aggressors and the victim to make sure the situation was truly resolved. It was efficient, effective, and rarely required anything more dramatic than a firm word and the implicit authority of his position. But something about this particular situation felt different to Marcus, though he couldn't immediately identify what it was. Perhaps it was the particular vulnerability he sensed in David, or the calculated cruelty he detected in Tyler's approach. Whatever it was, Marcus found himself feeling more personally invested in the outcome than he typically allowed himself to become. As he drew within hearing distance of the group, Marcus could finally make out what Tyler was saying to David, and what he heard made his jaw tighten with anger. Tyler's voice carried just enough volume for Marcus to hear the cruel edge in his words as he leaned over David's table. "Look at this little freak," Tyler was saying to his audience, gesturing dismissively at David's lunch. "Eating his weird foreign food and probably going home to bow to his parents or whatever it is these people do." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he heard the racist undertones in Tyler's comments. David had brought homemade Korean food for lunch, the kind of meal that showed his mother's care and cultural pride, but which apparently made him a target for Tyler's ignorant mockery. The other students in Tyler's group laughed nervously, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction the harassment was taking, but too intimidated or peer-pressured to speak up. "I bet he doesn't even speak real English at home," Tyler continued, his voice getting louder as he gained confidence from his audience's laughter. "This probably just makes those weird sounds like they do in the movies. Come on, say something in your funny language for us." David kept his eyes fixed on his tray, his shoulders hunched forward in a defensive posture that made him look even smaller than he already was. Marcus could see the boy's hands trembling as he tried to pretend he couldn't hear what was happening. But it was obvious that every word was hitting its target. "I'm talking to you, freak," Tyler said more aggressively, reaching out to tap David's shoulder with more force than was necessary. "Don't ignore me when I'm trying to be friendly. Show us how you people eat this weird stuff." The situation was escalating exactly as Marcus had anticipated, but instead of moving in immediately as he normally would, he found himself hesitating. Something about David's quiet dignity in the face of this assault touched something deep in Marcus's own experience. He remembered being the outsider himself in various situations throughout his life. The poor kid in a middle-class school, the black soldier in predominantly white units, the single father trying to navigate parent-teacher conferences after his wife's death. Tyler grabbed David's chopsticks from beside his lunch tray and held them up mockingly. "Look, everyone. He eats with sticks like he's too good for regular forks. What's wrong? Your parents too cheap to teach you how to use real silverware?" The group around Tyler erupted in laughter that was both nervous and cruel. Marcus could see other students at nearby tables beginning to notice the commotion, some turning to watch with the morbid curiosity that teenage audiences brought to social disasters. A few students looked uncomfortable and seemed to be debating whether they should intervene or get help. But the social dynamics of high school made such interventions rare and difficult. David finally looked up from his tray, and Marcus could see the mixture of hurt, anger, and humiliation in the boy's eyes. For a moment, it looked like David might actually respond to Tyler's provocation, which Marcus knew would only make the situation worse. Instead, David did something that surprised everyone present. He stood up slowly, gathered his lunch items with deliberate care, and began to walk away from the table. "Oh no, you're not walking away from me," Tyler said, moving to block David's path. "I wasn't done talking to you yet. Don't you have any manners? When someone's trying to have a conversation, you don't just walk away." The confrontation had now attracted the attention of most of the students in the surrounding area. Marcus could feel the familiar electric tension that preceded either a physical fight or a complete social humiliation. This was usually the moment when he would step in, using his authority to disperse the crowd and separate the participants before things could escalate further. But Marcus found himself frozen by something he hadn't expected, a memory that hit him with startling clarity and emotional force. Suddenly, he was 12 years old again, standing in his own school cafeteria while a group of older boys mocked the free lunch he received because his family qualified for the federal assistance program. He remembered the shame he felt about the subsidized meal, the way the other students laughed when his poverty was exposed, and most clearly, he remembered the adult supervisor who witnessed the entire incident and chose to look the other way. Rather than intervene, that supervisor's inaction had stayed with Marcus for 40 years, a wound that had never fully healed. The message it sent was clear. Some people's dignity wasn't worth protecting. Some children's pain didn't matter enough. To risk confrontation, and authority figures couldn't always be counted on to do what was right when it mattered most. "Say something, you little coward," Tyler demanded, stepping closer to David and using his size advantage to intimidate. "I know you can talk because I've heard you in class with your weird accent. Say something now, or are you too scared?" David stood perfectly still, his lunch tray in his hands, looking directly at Tyler with an expression that was remarkably calm given the circumstances. His silence seemed to frustrate Tyler, who had clearly expected either fear or anger that he could use to justify further escalation. "What's wrong with you?" Tyler asked, his voice taking on an edge of genuine confusion. "Are you stupid, or just deaf? I'm talking to you." The crowd around them had grown larger, with students from other tables now standing and moving closer to get a better view of whatever was about to happen. Marcus could see phone cameras being raised as some students prepared to record what they expected would be either a fight or a complete humiliation. In the social media age, moments like this lived forever. Turning private pain into public entertainment, Marcus felt the weight of decision pressing on him. His job required him to intervene in situations like this, to use his authority to protect students from harassment and prevent conflicts from escalating into violence. Every day of his training, every principle of his professional responsibilities, demanded that he step forward immediately. But something deeper was also at work in this moment. Marcus found himself thinking not just about his job duties, but about the kind of person he wanted to be, the kind of message he wanted to send, and the kind of world he wanted to help create through his actions. He thought about David's quiet dignity, Tyler's learned cruelty, and the audience of students who were watching to see what would happen when someone in authority was present to witness injustice. The memory of his own childhood experience of abandonment by adults who should have protected him merged with his current role as someone who had the power to make a different choice. Marcus realized that this moment would define not just what happened to David and Tyler, but what kind of person he himself was going to choose to be. Tyler's frustration with David's continued silence was reaching a boiling point. The lack of response from his victim was undermining the power dynamic he was trying to establish, making him look ineffective in front of his audience. Marcus watched as Tyler's tactics shifted from verbal mockery to more direct intimidation. "It's fine if you won't talk. Maybe you'll pay attention," Tyler said, reaching out and deliberately knocking David's lunch tray from his hands. The plastic tray clattered to the floor, sending rice, vegetables, and carefully prepared Korean dishes scattering across the cafeteria tiles. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet space, and Marcus could see David's shoulders sag slightly as he watched. His mother's cooking spread across the dirty floor. The crowd around them reacted with a mixture of gasps and nervous laughter. Some students looked genuinely shocked at Tyler's escalation, while others seemed excited by the drama unfolding before them. Marcus noticed several students holding up their phones, recording the incident for later sharing on social media platforms where David's humiliation would be preserved and replicated far beyond the walls of Lincoln High School. David stood perfectly still for a moment, looking down at his scattered lunch, with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. There was sadness there, certainly, and disappointment, but also something that looked remarkably like resolve. Instead of bending down to try to salvage his meal or reacting with anger or tears as Tyler had probably expected, David simply looked up and made direct eye contact with his tormentor. The silence stretched between them. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he watched this quiet battle of wills unfold. David's refusal to be drawn into Tyler's game was clearly frustrating the older boy, who had built his social identity around his ability to provoke reactions from those he targeted. Lack of fear or anger in David's response was undermining everything Tyler thought he knew about how these encounters were supposed to work. "What's your problem?" Tyler demanded, his voice rising with genuine confusion and growing anger. "Why won't you fight back? Are you too much of a coward to even defend yourself?" Marcus realized that Tyler's question revealed something important about the bully's psychology. Tyler needed David to respond with fear, anger, or submission, because those reactions confirmed Tyler's sense of power and control. David's calm silence was actually more threatening to Tyler than any verbal comeback or physical resistance would have been, because it suggested that Tyler's opinion and actions didn't matter enough to warrant a response. The crowd was beginning to shift restlessly, as if sensing that this confrontation wasn't following the script they expected from high school drama. Some students looked disappointed that there wasn't more excitement or conflict, while others seemed increasingly uncomfortable with Tyler's obvious desperation to provoke a reaction. "Say something," Tyler shouted, his voice echoing off the cafeteria walls and drawing the attention of students from across the entire room. "What kind of freak just stands there like a statue? Fight back or run away or cry or something? Do something." David continued to stand quietly, his expression unchanging, his posture straight despite the mess of food at his feet. Never seen anything quite like it, a 15-year-old boy, maintaining such composure in the face of public humiliation and aggressive confrontation. There was something almost spiritual about David's stillness, as if he had found some inner source of strength that made Tyler's attacks powerless to touch him. Marcus found himself thinking about his military training and the various forms of resistance he had observed during his years of service. He had seen people respond to aggression with violence, with submission, with clever verbal deflection, and with strategic retreat. But he had rarely seen someone respond with such complete, dignified silence. It was a form of resistance that required tremendous inner strength and confidence, the ability to remain centered, unshaken while under direct attack. Tyler was becoming increasingly frantic. As his usual tactics failed to produce their intended effect, he began pacing around David in a circle, gesturing wildly and raising his voice even higher. "This is crazy. Nobody just stands there like that. What's wrong with you? Are you even human?" The desperation in Tyler's voice was becoming obvious to everyone watching, and Marcus could see that some of Tyler's own followers were beginning to look uncomfortable with their leader's behavior. The power dynamic that Tyler was trying to establish was backfiring spectacularly, making him look weak and out of control rather than dominant and intimidating. Marcus realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a masterclass in nonviolent resistance being performed by a 15-year-old boy who probably had never heard of Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., but who was instinctively understanding and applying principles that had changed the world. Not passive or weak. It was active and powerful, forcing everyone present to confront their own role in what was happening. The audience was beginning to shift in ways that Tyler clearly hadn't anticipated. Instead of laughing at David or encouraging Tyler's aggression, more and more students were looking uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Some were putting their phones away, apparently deciding that this wasn't the kind of entertainment they wanted to record and share. Others were beginning to whisper among themselves, and Marcus could sense that the tide of opinion in the room was slowly turning. Tyler seemed to sense this shift as well, and it made him even more desperate to regain control of the situation. "Fine," he said, stepping closer to David until they were almost touching. "If you won't talk, maybe I need to find another way to get your attention." Marcus could see that Tyler was preparing to escalate to physical violence, and this was clearly the moment when intervention was not just appropriate but necessary. Any hesitation beyond this point would be a dereliction of his duty and potentially dangerous for David's safety. But as Marcus prepared to step forward and end the confrontation, something unexpected happened that changed everything about the situation. David finally spoke, but not in the way anyone had anticipated. "I'm sorry that you're hurting so much inside," David said quietly, his voice calm and clear despite the chaos around him. "I hope things get better for you." The words hit the crowded cafeteria like a thunderclap. Tyler stopped mid-motion, his mouth falling open in shock. The audience fell completely silent, with everyone straining to process what they had just heard. Marcus felt his own breath catch in his throat as he realized what David had just done. In one simple statement, David had completely reframed the entire encounter. Instead of responding to Tyler's aggression with matching hostility, he had responded with compassion. Instead of seeing Tyler as a powerful tormentor, he had identified him as someone who was suffering and acting out of pain. It was a response so unexpected, so mature, and so emotionally intelligent that it left everyone present scrambling to understand what had just happened. Marcus found himself thinking that in 30 years of dealing with conflict situations, he had never seen anything quite like what David had just accomplished. The silence that followed David's words was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced in his years at Lincoln High School. It was the kind of profound quiet that occurs when an entire room full of people suddenly understands that they are witnessing something significant, something that will be remembered and talked about long after the moment has passed. Even the background noise of the cafeteria, the distant conversations, the clattering of dishes, the hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade into nothing as everyone processed what they had just heard. Tyler stood frozen, his hand still raised as if he had been preparing to push or strike David, but now completely unsure of what to do next. His entire framework for understanding confrontation had just been shattered by David's response. Tyler had been expecting fear, anger, defiance, or submission, any reaction that would allow him to continue playing his familiar role as the dominant aggressor. But compassion? Genuine concern for his well-being? This was so far outside Tyler's experience that he seemed unable to formulate any response at all. Marcus watched Tyler's face cycle through a series of emotions in rapid succession. First, there was confusion, as Tyler tried to process whether David's words were some kind of trick or trap. Then came anger, as Tyler's defense mechanisms kicked in against this unexpected vulnerability. But underneath both of these reactions, Marcus could see something else, a flicker of recognition, as if David's words had touched something real and painful that Tyler had been working very hard to keep hidden. The students in Tyler's group looked just as confused as their leader. They had signed up to be part of a show of dominance and intimidation, not to witness this kind of emotional honesty and vulnerability. Some of them were beginning to back away slightly, as if sensing that the dynamic they had come to watch had transformed into something much more personal and uncomfortable. David, meanwhile, retained the same calm composure he had shown throughout the entire encounter. He had spoken his words of compassion without any trace of sarcasm or condescension. They were clearly genuine, offered from a place of real understanding rather than strategic manipulation. Marcus found himself wondering what kind of wisdom and emotional maturity it took for a 15-year-old to respond to cruelty with such grace. "What? ... What did you say?" I really managed to ask, his voice much quieter than it had been moments before. "That I'm sorry that you're hurting," David repeated gently, "and I meant it. I know what it feels like to be in pain and not know how to make it stop. I hope you find what you need to feel better." The directness and sincerity of David's response seemed to hit Tyler like a physical blow. Marcus could see the older boy's carefully constructed tough guy persona beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of the vulnerable person underneath. Tyler's hands, which had been clenched into fists, slowly relaxed at his sides. His aggressive posture softened, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, Tyler looked like what he actually was, a troubled 17-year-old boy who was struggling with problems he didn't know how to solve. I don't. I don't understand, Tyler said, shaking his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. Why would you? Why would you say that to me? I just knocked your food on the floor. I was calling you names. Why aren't you mad at me?
David
Considered the question seriously before responding. Being mad at you wouldn't change anything that just happened. It wouldn't help either of us feel better. I've been mad at people before, and all it did was make me feel worse inside. Marcus realized that David was articulating a level of emotional intelligence that many adults never achieved. The boy had somehow learned, probably through his own experiences with pain and difficulty, that responding to aggression with matching aggression only perpetuated cycles of hurt and conflict. His choice to respond with compassion was not weakness or naivety. It was a demonstration of remarkable strength and wisdom. The crowd of students watching this exchange was beginning to react in ways that Marcus had never seen before in a high school confrontation. Instead of the usual excitement or nervous laughter that accompanied dramatic conflicts, there was a sense of reverence, as if everyone present understood that they were witnessing something important and transformative. Several students were wiping tears from their eyes, apparently moved by David's display of grace under pressure. Others looked thoughtful, as if David's words had given them new perspective on their own experiences with conflict and pain. Even the students who had been recording the incident on their phones had lowered their devices, seemingly recognizing that this moment was too sacred to be treated as entertainment. Tyler continued to stare at David, his expression cycling between confusion, anger, and something that looked almost like gratitude. I don't get it, he said finally. People don't talk like that, especially not to people who are being jerks to them. Maybe that's part of the problem, David replied thoughtfully. Maybe if more people responded to hurt with kindness instead of more hurt, there would be less pain in the world. Marcus found himself deeply moved by this exchange, not just because of David's remarkable response, but because of what it revealed about the capacity for growth and change that existed in both boys. Tyler was clearly struggling with David's unexpected compassion, but he was engaging with it honestly, rather than simply dismissing it or lashing out further. There was something happening between these two students that went far beyond the typical dynamics of bullying, victimization. But I was mean to you, Tyler said, his voice taking on a note of genuine confusion and perhaps even remorse. I said terrible things about your family and your culture, and knocked your lunch on the floor. How can you not hate me for that? David smiled slightly, the first change in his expression since the confrontation had begun. Hating you would hurt me more than it would hurt you. Besides, I think the mean things you said probably hurt you too. People don't usually say cruel things when they're feeling good about themselves and their lives. Marcus realized that David had just offered Tyler something that the older boy had probably never experienced: forgiveness without conditions, understanding without judgment, and compassion that wasn't dependent on Tyler's behavior or attitude. It was a gift that required nothing from Tyler, except the willingness to receive it. The transformation in Tyler's demeanor was becoming more obvious by the moment. His shoulders had relaxed from their aggressive posture, his hands were no longer clenched, and his facial expression had softened from hostile to something approaching vulnerable. Marcus could see that David's response had disarmed Tyler more effectively than any authority figure or disciplinary action ever could have. I don't know what to say, Tyler admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never had someone. Nobody's ever. You don't have to say anything, David replied gently. But if you want to, I'm listening. Marcus felt tears forming in his own eyes as he watched this extraordinary exchange unfold. In all his years of breaking up fights and mediating conflicts, he had never seen anything like David's approach to dealing with aggression. The boy had somehow found a way to transform a situation that seemed destined for violence or humiliation into an opportunity for genuine human connection and understanding. Tyler stood there for what felt like an eternity, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find words that had never existed in his vocabulary before. The aggressive mask he had worn for so long was completely gone now, replaced by the face of a confused and hurting teenager who had just encountered something that challenged everything he thought he knew about how the world worked. My dad, Tyler said suddenly, the word seeming to escape from him involuntarily. My dad left last month. Just packed up his stuff one day and moved in with his secretary, he said, He said I was too much trouble, that dealing with me was part of why he needed to get away from our family. The admission hung in the air like a confession, and Marcus could see that Tyler was as surprised as anyone that he had shared something so personal and painful. David listened without judgment, his expression showing only compassion and understanding. "That must have hurt terribly," David said simply. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Tyler's eyes filled with tears that he tried desperately to blink away. "It did hurt. It still hurts. I know I've been taking it out on other people, but I didn't know how to stop. Every time I see someone who seems happy or peaceful or like their life is working, I just get angry because mine feels so messed up." Marcus realized that Tyler had just articulated something profound about the psychology of bullying, that it often came from a place of pain and envy rather than genuine malice. Tyler wasn't cruel because he enjoyed causing suffering. He was cruel because he was suffering himself and didn't know any healthier way to process those emotions. "I understand that feeling," David replied, nodding thoughtfully. "When I first moved here from Korea 2 years ago, I was angry at everyone who seemed to fit in easily while I felt like an outsider. I wanted them to feel as isolated and different as I did, but you don't act angry," Tyler said, confusion evident in his voice. You're like the calmest person I've ever met. How did you stop being angry?" David considered the question carefully before responding. "I think I learned that being angry at other people for having what I wanted didn't actually help me get those things for myself. It just made me feel worse and pushed people away. My grandmother taught me that when you're hurting, the best way to heal is to try to help other people who are hurting too." The wisdom in David's words seemed to resonate not just with Tyler, but with many of the students who were still gathered around them. Marcus noticed that the crowd had grown larger rather than smaller, as word of this unusual confrontation had spread throughout the cafeteria. But instead of the typical mob mentality that surrounded high school conflicts, there was a sense of reverence and attention, as if everyone present recognized that they were witnessing something important. "I don't know how to not be angry," Tyler admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I've been angry for so long that I don't remember what it feels like to be any other way, and I don't know how to fix all the things I've done wrong." David stepped forward slightly, closing some of the distance between them. "Maybe you don't have to fix everything all at once. Maybe you just have to start with one thing and then another thing until it gets easier." "What would the first thing be?" Tyler asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity and hope. "Well," David said, glancing down at the scattered remains of his lunch on the floor, "maybe the first thing could be helping me clean this up." Tyler followed David's gaze to the mess of food and broken containers on the cafeteria floor, and Marcus could see something shift in the older boy's expression. Without hesitation, Tyler dropped to his knees and began gathering the scattered items, his movements careful and respectful as he tried to salvage what he could of David's meal. "I'm so sorry," Tyler said as he worked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I said those things about your culture and your family. I'm sorry I made fun of your food. I'm sorry I've been such a jerk to you and to other people. I don't know how to be better, but I want to try." David knelt down beside Tyler and began helping him clean up the mess. "We can figure it out together," he said simply. "Nobody has to be alone with their pain." Marcus watched this extraordinary scene unfold with a mixture of professional amazement and personal emotion. In his years of dealing with conflict resolution, he had learned to recognize genuine transformation when he saw it. And what was happening between Tyler and David was absolutely authentic. This wasn't a temporary ceasefire or a strategic manipulation. It was a real moment of connection and understanding between two young people who had found a way to bridge their differences through vulnerability and compassion. The students surrounding them seemed to sense the significance of what they were witnessing as well. Many were openly crying, moved by the display of forgiveness and redemption playing out before them. Others looked thoughtful, as if reconsidering their own relationships and conflicts in light of what David had demonstrated was possible, as Tyler and David worked together to clean up the scattered lunch. They began talking quietly about their experiences, their families, and their struggles. Marcus could see that a genuine friendship was beginning to form between them, not based on shared interests or social status, but on mutual understanding and respect for each other's journey. Through difficult circumstances, David Tyler said as they finished gathering the last of the debris. "I know this doesn't make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm going to try to be different. Not just with you, but with everyone. I don't want to be the kind of person who hurts others because I'm hurting." "I believe you," David replied, and Marcus could hear in his voice that he genuinely meant it. "And if you ever need someone to talk to about the hard stuff, I'm here." Sometimes it helps to have a friend who understands what it's like to feel lost. As the two boys stood up together, brushing debris from their clothes, Marcus noticed that the entire cafeteria had fallen silent. Hundreds of students and staff members had witnessed this transformation, and there was a sense that everyone present had been changed by what they had seen. Marcus realized that his role in this situation had been exactly what it needed to be. Not the authority figure who imposed order through force or discipline, but the silent witness who allowed space for something extraordinary to unfold naturally. His decision not to intervene immediately had created the opportunity for David's wisdom and Tyler's capacity for growth to transform what could have been just another disciplinary incident into a profound moment of human connection. Standing there in the quiet aftermath of this remarkable encounter, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for having been present to witness it. He had learned something important about the power of patience, the wisdom of knowing when not to act, and the extraordinary capacity for redemption that existed in the hearts of the young people he worked with every day. In the weeks that followed the extraordinary encounter in the cafeteria, Marcus watched as the ripple effects of David's compassionate response spread throughout Lincoln High School in ways that nobody could have predicted. The story of what had happened between David and Tyler became legendary among the students. But it wasn't shared as typical high school gossip or drama. Instead, it was told with a sense of reverence and wonder, as if everyone who had witnessed it understood that they had seen something rare and transformative. Tyler's transformation was the most obvious and dramatic change. Within days of his encounter with David, he had begun approaching other students he had previously bullied or intimidated, offering sincere apologies and asking how he could make amends. His former group of followers initially tried to mock his new behavior, but Tyler's commitment to change proved stronger than their peer pressure. He withdrew from the toxic social circle that had enabled his worst behavior and began spending his lunch periods in the library, working with a tutor to bring up his grades. More remarkably, Tyler and David had indeed become genuine friends. Marcus often saw them walking together in the hallways, talking quietly about their classes, their families, and their plans for the future. Tyler had even started learning some Korean words from David, partly as a way to understand his friend's culture better, but also as a personal penance for the racist comments he had made during their confrontation. David, for his part, had gained something he had been seeking since his arrival at Lincoln High: genuine acceptance and friendship. But more than that, his response to Tyler's aggression had established him as someone whom other students respected and sought out for advice. Marcus had observed several instances where students who were dealing with conflicts or personal problems had approached David, drawn by his reputation for wisdom and compassion. The changes weren't limited to Tyler and David, however. Marcus noticed that the entire atmosphere of the school seemed different in subtle but important ways. Students were more likely to intervene when they witnessed bullying or harassment, often citing David's example as inspiration for their courage. The number of serious disciplinary incidents had decreased noticeably, and when conflicts did arise, students were more likely to seek mediation and understanding rather than escalation and revenge. Teachers and administrators had also taken notice of the shift in school culture. The principal, Dr. Sarah Williams, had called Marcus into her office a few weeks after the cafeteria incident to discuss what had happened and what lessons might be learned from it. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about that situation with Tyler. Brooks and David Kim," Dr. Williams had said. "I've read your incident report, and I have to admit, I was initially concerned that you didn't intervene more quickly. But looking at the results, I'm starting to think you showed remarkable wisdom in allowing that situation to play out as it did." Marcus had appreciated her recognition, but he had also been honest about his own uncertainty, I have to admit. "Dr. Williams, I wasn't sure I was making the right choice at the time. My instinct was to step in immediately, as I always do. But something about David's composure and the way he was handling the situation made me think that intervening might actually have prevented something important from happening. Dr. Williams had nodded thoughtfully. I think you were right. What David accomplished through his response to Tyler's aggression was far more effective than any punishment or disciplinary action we could have imposed. He didn't just stop a bullying incident, he transformed the bully into an advocate for kindness and understanding. The conversation with Dr. Williams had led to broader discussions about discipline and conflict resolution at Lincoln High. The school had begun implementing new approaches that emphasized restorative justice and peer mediation. Drawing directly from the lessons learned during David's encounter with Tyler, Marcus had been asked to help develop training programs for other staff members about when and how to allow space for students to resolve conflicts through dialogue and understanding rather than immediate administrative intervention. But perhaps the most profound change Marcus had observed was in his own understanding of his role and his purpose. The experience of witnessing David's extraordinary response to aggression had reminded him of why he had originally been drawn to work with young people. These students weren't just problems to be managed or potential troublemakers to be controlled. They were complex human beings with the capacity for wisdom, growth, and transformation that often exceeded that of the adults who supervised them. Marcus had begun approaching his work with a different perspective, looking for opportunities to trust students' ability to handle difficult situations with maturity and insight. He still intervened when necessary to prevent violence or serious harm. But he had learned to recognize moments when his silence and patient observation might be more valuable than his immediate action. Relationship he had developed with both Tyler and David had also become personally meaningful to him. Both boys had sought him out on multiple occasions, thanking him for his decision not to interfere with their confrontation and asking for his advice on various challenges they were facing. Marcus found these conversations deeply rewarding, as they reminded him that his role extended far beyond security and discipline to include mentorship and guidance. Tyler, in particular, had become something of a project for Marcus. The boy's transformation had been remarkable, but Marcus recognized that changing a lifetime of learned behaviors and coping mechanisms was an ongoing process that required support and understanding. He had connected Tyler with the school counselor and had also arranged for him to participate in a peer mentorship program where he could help younger students who were struggling with anger and family problems. David continued to amaze Marcus. With his emotional maturity and wisdom, the boy had started a conflict resolution club at the school, teaching other students the principles of nonviolent communication and compassionate response to aggression. The club had become one of the most popular extracurricular activities at Lincoln High, drawing students from all social groups who were interested in learning how to handle conflicts more effectively. As Marcus reflected on the months that had passed since that transformative day in the cafeteria, he realized that David's decision to respond to cruelty with compassion had taught him something crucial about the power of silence and patience. Sometimes the most important action an authority figure could take was to create space for others to discover their own capacity for wisdom and growth. The experience had also deepened Marcus's understanding of his own past experiences with bullying and abandonment. By witnessing David's response to Tyler's aggression, Marcus had found a kind of healing for his own childhood wounds. Seeing how David's compassion had transformed Tyler into someone who actively worked to prevent others from experiencing the pain he had once inflicted gave Marcus's hope that cycles of hurt and cruelty could indeed be broken. Standing in the same cafeteria where the extraordinary encounter had taken place, Marcus often thought about the lessons that day had taught him. He had learned that true authority sometimes meant knowing when not to use the power you possessed. He discovered that young people were capable of wisdom and compassion that could transform not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. He had been reminded that the most profound changes often happened not through force or punishment, but through the simple act of one person choosing to respond to pain with kindness. The bully had mocked David in front of everyone, but David's silence and Marcus's decision to respect that silence had indeed spoken louder than words. It had spoken of dignity, wisdom, courage, and the extraordinary human capacity for forgiveness and transformation. In choosing not to speak, both David and Marcus had created space for something beautiful and lasting to emerge from what had seemed like certain destruction.